Welcome to Gambling with an Edge. And now, here are Bob and Richard.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Gambling with an Edge. I'm Bob Dancer.
And I'm Richard Munchkin.
Today we come back with an encore performance with Joe and Semi-Pro. We talked to them last week and they had more to say, so here they are again. Joe and Semi-Pro, well, we're friends now. Joe and SP, welcome back to Gambling with an Edge.
Long time no see.
Yeah.
All right. Semi-Pro.
Yes.
What is your family's view on professional gambling as it relates to you in particular?
Let's dive right in. So this is something we didn't get to touch on last time, but I felt like it was important. Just, I feel like this topic comes up with like everyone that we interact with in a varying degree of severity, from being super supportive, really enthusiastic, thinking it's really cool, to condemning with some of our friends, really having a lot of conflict with their parents over.
To a severe degree.
To a really severe
no
degree.
contact,
yeah,
things like that.
Disowning.
Wow.
Yeah, some of
That's
our
serious.
friends. Yeah. And my situation is somewhere in the middle. So I used to work in a casino. Never was my plan. When I told my mom I got a job in a players club, you would have thought I can't even think of something. Like, she just was like,
Is that worse than being a hooker or not?
So I made that joke. I said, Mom, you're acting like I became a hooker. And she was like, don't be ridiculous. And I can.
This is worse.
Yes, exactly. Kind of that. And she came from a place of having, a very close friend whose partner, I think, gambled away their home. And so for her, it was a very emotional thing. Yes. Of, you're working in this place. And I see where she's coming from of, to one extent, people are responsible for their own actions. To another extent, if you're working in a business that is set up to fleece people, of their livelihood, and you're fun and you're nice. And I felt, not because of my mother, and came to this on my own, to a certain extent, you start to feel like you're enabling people just by, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I get that. But was it worse for you to be a dealer than it was for you to be a player?
A dealer was, I don't know. So dealer was hard for her because I quit school. I quit college when I started dealing blackjack. So I think that was like a huge blow. But it was also the first time in my life that I was completely financially independent. And so that, I think, was hard for her. Okay, so on one hand, I lived where I lived and where I dealt cards. I was working 2 jobs before that, and it wasn't even half of what I made. Being a dealer, they didn't have to help me with housing. They didn't have to pay for no expenses. I was completely financially independent at an age where I guess a lot of people are too, but I was not at the time.
You were early 20s is what we're talking about.
Yes. Yeah. And in California, and, a place where my 2 jobs combined before blackjack, I think paid less than $20,000, working full-time and a full-time student, 2 jobs full-time. But they weren't into that. Okay, it's great that you're making, money, but couldn't it be anything else? That my parents are religious. I think it's hard to tell your friends.
How would it reflect on me when I go to church?
Yes.
What's interesting about that, though, is Keith Taft was super, super religious. And, I stayed at his house one time, and, his wife was having Bible study class, the night we were there. And I asked him, how do you square this with your, sort of whole Christian faith? And he just very matter-of-factly said, there's nothing in the Bible against gambling.
Which I never knew until we were at a boot camp this weekend, Colin, and someone said that. And I was like, really? I was like, send me that verse. Send me that verse to send to my parents.
Well, it's lack of a verse, right?
Exactly. Well, I think they would talk, I believe one of Loud and Often, one of our friends who played on the church team, he had said, because he has a fairly extensive Bible knowledge and are very extensive, he said that would be how people would make decisions, was by drawing, I can't remember the word.
Drawing lots?
Yes. And but then it's become this, whole thing.
I mean, that doesn't, the Bible can be used to justify anything. So
yes.
somebody can pick a verse and say, this means...
As well as the benefit
as
it's been translated. So people can say, well, this translation says this, but, the etymology of this word was this. And so therefore, anyone, yes, it's very easy to...
they used it to justify slavery before the Civil War.
It's very easy to cherry pick and say, and also to look at one thing and ignore all of the other stuff that says something different. I know I really thought when we met, Colin and the church team that would help my case a little bit of like, look, this is, I don't want to paint them to be unsupportive people, but I asked you before the show if you thought he would mind, and we heard Andy Block from the MIT team speak, and he, has multiple degrees, and I always felt that the reason...
From impressive schools. And my opinion, even when we spoke with you last, when we didn't get around to this topic, was, I've always wondered, because the fact of the matter is, my parents and I don't really talk about gambling at all. They didn't know that I was playing professionally for the entire first year that I was. Since then, 2 years have passed. We've maybe had 2 conversations about it. And
how did those conversations go?
One of them was my dad explaining to me that he will defend me to people, which was nice, but it was also kind of like, felt like an undercut. That like to have to, it was like, people have insulted, or whatever. But I explained to them, the validity of the math and blah, blah, blah. And so on one hand, it was nice because it was the only moment really that it was like, oh, he, which I never thought that they didn't think it was legitimate. Because if my parents thought I was just flat out gambling or that this wasn't a real way to earn income, they would tell me, they would be like, you're being an idiot. Like, what are you thinking? So the lack of conversation indicates to me that they know that this is real and they know that this is a way to earn income, but it's just not their ideal, what they thought of me doing. And we have always struggled with that since I was a child of like, well, this is what we want. And me being like, well, I'm a person and like I have, other things that I like. My mom and I have a great relationship now, but an example is like when I was a kid, I couldn't wear pink and red together. She came from a family with very strict rules, and she's a pretty silly, loose, fun person, but that bleeds in to how you parent, like learned behavior stuff.
What was it that Andy Block
I couldn't
said?
either, by the way, so don't feel bad.
What was it that Andy Block said that struck a chord with you? Or?
Just that, so my parents' their biggest issue, or at least what they have said is their biggest issue, which I don't think is, but I think they feel safe saying, is, and I don't blame them, we're disappointed we invested this money into you for school and that you didn't finish. Who can blame them? School is so expensive. Yeah. I don't blame them for that. Education, especially higher education, is valued very highly in my family. But again, and so I've always thought, how'd I finish school, or if I go back to school, and you think this with people, it's like kind of a codependency thing. What will be enough to buy them letting me make my own decisions and having peace with that and being able to have a conversation and them just being on my team.
I think you put yourself in Andy's shoes when he said that he went to Harvard Law School and then he went back to playing after
poker.
Yeah. So then
I had this really kind of naive flash of, all I have to do is go to Harvard Law and then they'll let me, and it's not, and
but then you'd have to use it.
Exactly.
Right? It's like not enough to just go.
And this is what I think, a lot of people go through with their parents I don't feel like there's really ever been a time in my life where my decisions aligned with what they would want for me. That's never stopped me from doing the things I wanted to do. But I don't think you really ever don't want to have the people you love support you. Yeah. Sure. And so it just was interesting to have that breakthrough moment with gambling or, professional gambling that I've had with so many other decisions of like, there's nothing that I can do that would make them be into this. And that's okay. Like, they're allowed to have their opinions and I'm allowed to not do what they think I should do. But that's hard when you see families who are like, oh my gosh. But, at the same time we met, I can't think of his screen name, but a gentleman who's been playing professionally for 30 years, and his dad went on trips with him, and he still thinks he's just a ploppy. His dad still does not validate him. After 30 years and 2 homes and all of his kids through school. And so that for me, I mean, and you can tell he seems pretty devastated, but that is like, okay, well, you know, sometimes people just they just can't get behind it. And that makes me feel thankful that my parents are, I mean, you always want people to be like championing, like, I can't even say that word, championing you and not just being tolerant of your decisions. But there have been so many times in my life where they were blatantly disapproving. And so this is kind of, I think, the best that they can give me.
How much do you think of it as like just how niche it is and how such a small percentage of gamblers come out on top over time? Like, you know, everyone in this room, it's a really small community. So do you think that plays into people's disbelief or like sort of their dismissal?
If there were more movies like 21, it might help, right? Because
I think that would freak my parents out more. They'd be like, "Oh no, grow up."
Yeah, they have to understand
less
that,
dramatic
like,
versions.
Yeah,
being chained up in the basement.
Yes,
and you know, being beat up is.
Well, that's what's so interesting
Molly's game.
Yeah. Well, this is what. Yeah, right. Oh man, how great that was. But no, I don't want them to see that.
The reality is like a lot of times playing is very mundane and very boring, but you can't put that in a movie. Like it's
and that's what's so
for the mass media. Like
that's what I really do think it has shown to me. Like especially a reparation of my relationship with my mom, because how this whole thing started, so during the period of time when Joe and I were broken up after we first started dating, in those couple months, I quit dealing blackjack and I moved home for like 3 months for the first time since I had left home. So a considerable amount of time. And when I lived at home previously, we had a horrible relationship. Things had been repaired. My mom and me, not Joe and myself, but my mom and my dad, things were really rocky. I was like I have 2 brothers. I was enough girl for the whole family. Like, I had mellowed. I came home. Everything was really great between my parents and I's relationship. But things were hard, I think, for my parents at the time. My dad was having a job transition. And when I told my mom I was leaving to learn how to count cards, not to even play, but just to learn, I think she felt really abandoned and scared and just completely freaked out and was hysterical and crying and like just really lost it. And then for the first time since I was, you know, a young teenager, I did not tell her for a whole year what I was doing because I just didn't want, normally I'm fine with the conflict. I'd rather have open communication and people unhappy and like work through that than to lie by omission. But it just was so, it was really,
it's like, oh, what are you doing in Iowa now?
Oh yeah, I ended up telling my parents actually with 10 minutes to spare as we were leaving from family Thanksgiving. My brother told me he had outed me to my grandma because she had been talking shit, saying that I was freeloading off of Joe for a year and like not, you know, just being like a lazy ass. And my brother came to my rescue and was like, well, I'll have you know, she's actually making money for him. And my grandma, who still tells a story about going to Bible college in Reno and her pastor giving her a nickel to gamble on bingo, and still she has the nickel because daddy didn't allow gambling or something, you know, she like, oh, it was
like Semi-Pro's parents. We were all sitting in the living room together, and they didn't know that she was playing professionally for like a year, and then I don't know, your grandma like just said something out of nowhere.
There was a commercial about the Muppets and Granny goes, "Oh, I hate the Muppets." And then she turns to Joe and myself and goes, "Oh, so you're gambling too, huh?" And our stomachs dropped.
Yeah, because their parents or her parents were right there, and
like on the other side of the sectional,
and
not
we're just
listening.
looking at each other like, what's about to happen now?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's quite a segue from the Muppets.
This was 2 years ago. My grandma now is and I think at the time too, she's dealing with like early onset, or not, it's not early onset. It's just coming into all of our awarenesses at dementia or Alzheimer's. So her segues are, you know, pretty
so we had
severe.
We had the bags like packed at the door, about to go to the airport. And then we just had a little family like
Well,
5-minute meeting. Like
Joe and my older brother get along really well. They're pretty similar in a lot of ways, and I think I kind
how
of.
did you say it? You were just like
I throw them for a loop often.
You just did like a
and,
2-sentence like thing, and then we just laughed.
Well,
like.
they were the whole week. I was supposed to tell them, and Joe doesn't like conflict. I was like, wait, I can say your name. Okay, so he doesn't like conflict at all, and he's like, when are you going to do this? Like, oh my gosh, and I was, I didn't know. And then I think we were standing at the door with my brother, and I'm saying, oh my gosh, why did you tell Granny? And he was like, I thought she knew. And I was like, no, you knew she didn't know. Like, what are you talking about? And they're like, are you going to do it? Are you going to do it? And then, we walked into the room to give hugs, to walk out to the car. And I said, oh, also, by the way, I've been playing blackjack professionally since January. Bye. Love you. Like... And I said to I know this is so dysfunctional, but it's better for my family sometimes for them to be able to kind of chew the cud and like process the thoughts and think about what we all want to say. And I think my mom was shocked, but my dad also said something along the lines of, well, duh, like, oh, okay, so you went to, Florida to learn how to count cards. Duh. What do you think we thought? But I don't think my mom.
She probably didn't want to think
She didn't want to think about it. And I guess we've had like a handful of short conversations, but the only thing she's ever really been concerned with, like, is it dangerous? And I, showed her what I normally wear and where we normally are. And I don't look like a target. And I stand out in the sense that I'm a young woman, usually alone with money, but I was lucky enough, too, that with the sessions that I was playing, especially in the beginning, they either were so short that Joe was still on property and I would just go jump in the car and we'd drive away, or it would be long enough that I'm outlasting any creeps who are lingering, looking at the money. And so I never felt afraid, other than 2 or 3 times in the many, many, many sessions I have played. And her other concern, I think, was... you have this vision like that it is the movie 21, it's this big party and it's crazy. And when we're in the middle of nowhere, it so often is just boring and +1, -1 and sitting for hours and like nothing.
Yeah,
it's not
the
exciting.
Thing in the movie where, the guy gets chained up and beaten.
Yeah.
For people who don't know any better, that's the kind of stuff they really worry about.
Yes.
Too, right?
Yes. And
plus, I think in the back of their minds, a lot of people still think the mafia runs the casinos.
Yes.
They're going to get mad. And
yeah. And I think the other thing that's interesting is so again, like with Joe and myself, I'm not conflict averse, but I would say as I get older, I'm more risk averse, whereas he is an adrenaline junkie for sure. And I think my mom does know that.
You're pretty old now, like almost late 20s.
I know it. Well, but I was pretty wild when I was younger, so I burnt a lot of that out of my system, and so now, I think that is helpful for my mom too. Of like, okay, well, I don't know. It's like, Mom, I'm like completely sober, sitting in a room doing math. Like, right. What are you worried about? Like, it's not a thing. And I think
it's a mother's nature just to worry about stuff.
Totally. So, that's my story. I think you should tell your story about your mom and the
my mom
shark
was
dive.
sort of the same background. She had, friends of friends who've lost, everything and just severe gambling addicts. So every time I would call her just to catch up, the first thing she would say would be like, "Did you lose like everything? Like, are you okay? Like, have you?"
And his mom is the sweetest. She's not meaning
really
it in a mean
nice
way or a judgy way. She's like genuinely worried. She loves him so much.
So, and then, like when I would go to visit her for like Thanksgiving or Christmas, like we would hug and she'd be like, "Are you okay? Like, are you okay? Like, did you lose all your money?" I'm like, "No, actually, I made more this year. Oh, this year was really good." Like, it just, and so eventually she stopped.
And she would say when we would see her,
"I made $500,000. How much did you make?"
Well, and she's so sweet. So when I met her, every time we would leave, she'd be like, something along the lines of like with a smile and like a nervous, just stop playing blackjack, ha ha ha. Like,
yeah, and her thing is like she says like you can do something else now. Like you've gone to enough places, enough people know who you are. It's fine. You can stop. Like that's her thing. But she's kind of accepted it, I think.
Well, and then it was like the second or third time I think we went to visit her. We're going to leave, and I said, "Did Joe ever show you the video of his cageless shark dive?" And her mouth drops open and Joe giggles, and he's like, yeah, Mom, look at this. And pulls out this video of this shark dive he did in, I think, Jupiter, Florida, with this man who has been has had serious shark bite injuries. This guy was crazy.
Yeah, he feeds the sharks
He's
and they
crazy.
all swarm around us. And
Joe had rented this
feeding.
rig to film the whole thing, and the video is the sharks knocking into the camera and biting the fish. And she watches the video, and at the end she looks at both of us and she's like, just play blackjack. Just play blackjack. And has she said anything non-blackjack to you since, or was that now she just says you've done enough?
Yeah, she just
You're
but
successful
she's just pretty
enough.
light about it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I wanna ask you about what is your tipping policy, and how does that affect semi-pro having been a dealer and worked for tips?
Let's take a deep breath.
Well, I think I feel like we're really on the same page about this.
Yeah. It's just I guess. Yeah, I mean, it's no.
The tipping policy is if you want to tip your own money.
Yeah.
So if I wanted to tip it, and that was
right. Yeah.
before I even was bankrolled, because Joe has briefly bankrolled. You've had experience bankrolling other people too. And I used to ask him, I was voracious. I wanted to know everything. I thought it was so interesting. And so I would say, especially when I was a dealer, what's the tipping policy? And he said, if you want to tip, tip your own money. It's counting cards is a very small margin. You cannot afford to tip doing this play, is our opinion. Some, other plays with higher edges, it's a necessity sometimes. That
was the general policy. It's just, I mean, I feel like I can count on my hand, the amount of times where we were both playing a specific game that we decided to tip for various reasons, some of them being safety and this and that, playing at sketchy places. But for the most part, it was no. I think the lines could just get really blurred when you try to implement a tipping, policy. I think emotions, it becomes an emotional decision instead of a smart financial EV decision a lot of times. For players, I think they get pressured into it or think that you're getting more juice out of the squeeze than you really are. So
and the dealers are not the people who are outing you. You can't really buy more time most of the time with a deal, and you can tip.
Sometimes the dealers out you. I mean,
sometimes,
rarely, but sometimes.
But even then, it's one of the times that I did tip a dealer because he was giving me insane pen and was the fastest. He was the one who outed me. So you can't buy.
Well, the other problem is you can't tip enough to make the dealer happy.
That's what I tell everyone. More is never enough. So my example is I worked in the middle of nowhere and I worked graveyard shifts. So we kept our own tips. There would be nights fairly often you would take home $0. Other nights you would take home lots and lots of money. My best night ever, and I only dealt for a year and a half, and this was the middle of the night, a Tuesday, an off season. And I made, I think, $1,700 in 3 hours and got the early out. And I left in a horrible mood because my coworker, who I did not like, went home with $2,100. So my best night ever, I left upset. Yes. And so when you're a dealer, Richard, we've talked about this. It's a really hard job. It can be a very negative environment. I don't know if this was your experience where I worked because it was small. There was competition amongst the dealers. We all would say what we had made. And then you leave feeling bad if you didn't make the most, and you left feeling great if you did. It was just this really weird
Unfortunately
vibe.
For me, I didn't work in a place where you kept your own tips.
Okay.
We pooled our tips. So, yeah.
It's a different, yeah.
If you're, let's say you're spreading up to whatever, 2 hands of 800, and, your EV is, I don't know, 200, let's just say $200 an hour. Well, if you're spreading that much, you can be up $15,000, $20,000. What are you going to tip in that hour that you've earned $200, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
25?
Yeah.
And you're up $15,000 and gave the dealer $25.
Exactly.
They are not happy.
No.
That's even worse than not tipping at all.
They're livid. Sometimes I worked in a place where people would sometimes kick the chips back because they were insulted. They were like, "You need it more than me." Now they could get written up if they got caught, but that's still money. It's just a really skewed mindset. You see so much money, you're desensitized to the value. If someone tipped me a black chip, I was waiting for the next black chip. I wasn't like, "Oh my gosh, this is crazy. What other job do you know?
And another point to your green chip analogy was that I did a calculation over the weekend for the boot camps just to show, just so they could visually see an illustration. If I looked at all my records, and if I were to tip a green chip 1 out of every 4 shoes that I've ever had in my career, it amounts to like $289,000. And your green chip is nothing when you're betting 2 by 1,000. It's like an insult to them.
They're still upset.
Yeah.
So 300. And so when people say, oh, I don't want to feel uncomfortable. Well, one, if you're getting into this line of work, you're going to feel uncomfortable. People are going to tell you you're playing wrong. People are going to give you pressure to tip. Like, you can't really want to do this way and not be willing to feel uncomfortable. But then seeing that metric, it's like, do you $300,000 care how comfortable you are? Do you want to pay that much to feel more comfortable? And even then, they're still going to be upset with you. And it's pretty unanimous that people are like, no, that's gross. I don't want to pay that. And I want to add too, so this is my tipping opinion coming from someone who kept my tips, that usually more is never enough. Think about if they pool, you could tip them $1,000. How much are they going to get? If it's a big property, they get what? $10, $50 from that?
Oh, or not even.
Or not even. Yeah. So.
And then some places, like, they split it with the pit. And then the pit has to tip out like someone out. Like, it's just crazy.
So my whole thing was, because I'm a generous tipper everywhere else in my life. It was really hard in the beginning, not because I didn't understand mathematically, but because I knew how hard that job was to want to, again, this is like casino brainwashing. Take care, quote unquote, take care of your deal. Like, they really brainwash you. They have a setup where you're playing a game. If you play it that way, that you're guaranteed to lose, and then they don't pay their employees and brainwash you and the employees into thinking that a quote unquote good patron will take care of them. There have been places where I played for many, many hours, and I would bring in donuts or something, or I'd bring a coffee, and then you're spending at most $30, which tipping $30, again, they'd be insulted. And then with that $30, you have the people who you like, and the people who like you are either pretending they like donuts or at least saying thank you. And the people who are going to be nasty either way are saying things like, oh, are you trying to make me fat? Like, it shows really, it's a litmus test for how nice someone is and how genuine they are. A dealer who's unhappy and being mean to you is not going to be able to be bought, is my opinion. Or they're going to think you're a sucker and, be like, oh, good, I was mean to them and they still tipped me. Ha 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 ha. Like, because I would meet people like that with my coworkers too. So. All
right. Before we get on to the next subject, we're going to take a brief commercial break. The South Point has more than 10,000 games, returning more than 99%. This is more than anyone else has. In March, the promotion is for players who already received mailers. Instead of getting your usual amount of money 4 times, Tuesdays through Thursdays, in March, you pick up free play Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, and if you do, you pick up an identical amount Friday or Saturday of the same week. Pick up all 8 free play offerings. You'll get another one twice as large on April 1st. At videopoker.com is the best place to play lots of games. If you sign up for the gold membership, $8.95 a month or $79.95 a year, this allows you to get correction on most of your games. The game of the week is Max Action Poker, where you pay 6 to 10 coins per line, and all the pay schedule categories from 3 of a kind and up get bumped. You're going to get a more valuable game the more coins you play. You also get more variance. It will require learning an entirely new strategy. And since flushes and straights pay so much more than what you're used to, your intuition will be off on how to play the hands. It will not be particularly difficult, as existing video poker software is fully capable of creating a new strategy for you, but you still have to learn it. Let's go back to talk to Joe and Semi-Pro. And you guys have worked and played together, gone to such hot spots as the middle of Iowa in the wintertime. How do you guys mix working and vacation?
So I first would like to tell about the time that Joe took us to a hotel that the first room was infested with sugar ants. And then we switched into the room that had the broken lock. Or no, the sugar ants room, he only switched because the lock was broken on the door. And, we have to protect the money. and we
I was
switched.
fine with the sugar.
And it was 4:30 in the morning. We're both delirious. Like I was not convinced there were bugs. I thought maybe I was hallucinating. It was so gross. And then we switched into the next room. And the
Same
beds,
hotel, but next
same
room.
hotel.
and so these are our vacations, you guys. Just and then the next room, the beds were so teensy that he, was like, "Do you mind if we just sleep in the separate beds? These are too small." And I was like, "That's just fine." And he immediately falls asleep and starts snoring. And I'm laying in bed,
that's just fine.
and I get bit. And I freak out, and I was like, "Something just bit me." And he turns on the lights, and there's a bed bug crawling away from me in the bed, and I'm flipping out. And he's smart. I just remembered another story we need to tell, but he has the foresight to grab the phone and take the video. So we go down and talk to the guy at the front counter, and he says, "Okay, I'll get you another room." And Joe says, "No, look at this video." And the man says, no problem, I'll get you another room." And he said, "No, we want to go. We need to leave." I think you should tell. Well,
I just want to say that, after your bankroll gets over a certain amount, you get, once you pass, say, 100,000, you really sort of move above the Motel 6 category.
Well,
this was the Night's Inn. I'll take a Motel 6 any day.
It was out of necessity because, all the other, it was like a holiday.
Yeah, there was nothing.
New Orleans or something, and all of the hotels were booked, and this was the only thing left. It was our worst.
We ended up,
option,
I think we had the benefit of when we switched hotels at that point, it was 6:30 or 7 in the morning or something. We got a double day, you check in and it counts. I don't know. Anyway.
We were staying at this other place, and I was asleep, and then Rachel wakes me up. And
this was during my training.
Yeah.
I was not even
Welcome to
actively
the
playing
lifestyle.
yet. I flew out to Minnesota to meet up with him.
That was clever of you to break her in this way.
So we hear screaming.
This place, no, he was sleeping. I heard screaming. First of all, this motel looked like a juvenile detention center. It looked like barracks.
This is the glitter and glamour of.
I am not a high maintenance chick. I can hang with a lot. And we go to sleep, and I wake up, and this guy is. First of all, I'm paralyzed. I definitely, when things get really heightened and crazy like that, my first impulse is to pause. I don't have that it's the fight or flight. I freeze. So I'm waking up, and this guy is screaming, "You said it ain't my baby!" And there's a pregnant woman and they're young pregnant woman and her boyfriend in the wall. We're sharing a wall with them, and they're screaming at each other.
Yeah, he just is repeating over and over
"You
again.
said it ain't my baby!"
It was just, and you can hear
and he threw a lamp.
Lamps
so
are going
glass
on. You can
is
hear
breaking.
things breaking in the room.
Might as well kill her then. I guess.
And I have interacted with people when I was younger where things would go really wrong. Things I've heard, sometimes things go really wrong. And he is still sleeping. This is not waking him up. And you guys can see that I am shaking him, and Joe, people, you need to wake up. Someone's about to die. I'm freaking out. And Joe is half asleep, and he, someone's sleepwalking. He very calmly, rolls over, gets on the phone, and says, "Excuse me, we're in room blankety blank blank. There's an altercation occurring in the next room." And he hangs up, and I was like, what the fuck? Is that all you're going to do? What the hell?
Yeah. Well, we also had $80,000 in the room, so I can't go next door and invite this mess to
Well, and my danger responses are a little bit haywire because there are things that will freak me out that are tame. And my first instinct in that should not be, okay, it's 5:30 in the morning. These people are fighting. I should go knock on the door and see if they're okay. That's the wrong instinct to have, but that was the one I did. And someone showed up, I think, and they knocked.
You did that?
No. We wait. Now we're waiting. They're still fighting. I'm scared for this person.
She ran out of the room
naked. He's "Come back in here. You don't have your clothes on." It was crazy.
Anyway.
I think it was the craziest thing.
I think when we started, we had this fantasy that it would be this we're going to be able to mix vacation and work, and we can go to all these places, play half of the day, and chill on the beach. But for some reason,
that's why I started gambling. It was just for that and the sex.
Yeah. Well, and Joe's comp circuit had pretty much, when we met, he was at the height of everything was free.
Yeah. But even just
And-
taking downtime, I think for
Oh,
us,
yeah.
it's like, I don't know, when we get in the mode where we're playing and we're kind of like
If it's work
just
mode, it's work mode.
battling at the tables, it's hard to relax. Like
Yeah.
later that day or on, like, I don't know. It's just
Well,
for us.
also, once you've seen the world's largest ball of string, was that Missouri?
The third
I don't
time?
remember.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of sightseeing in a lot
Right.
of these places.
We kind of would have to, like, if we were going to go do like a really amazing hike or like the
There has
slot,
to be
the
no
slot
casino
canyons
around,
or like kayaking, it would have to be like we had mentally decided generating EV was done for a day
Right, like
or
the trip is
two.
over.
Exactly.
Now
Yes.
we're-
That's the only way it works for us. Like,
Because mentally then we're in two places. Like we might be going to this really lovely place, but mentally we're on the table, and that is not.
well, like let's
it's not
say like you
relaxing.
go to the beach at like 12 and you might if you were just on vacation you might want to stay till like 4 or 5 or whatever, but then like your EV brain is, or mine, I'm just
The
like
tables are
getting-
opening. The tables are opening.
Like 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. I'm like, okay, are we done laying here on the beach? Like,
Yeah.
can we get moving? So it just is not the right.
Or
the
we
first
would-
time I went to Europe, we rented a car, drove from Germany to the Netherlands to Belgium, took the ferry to England.
Yeah.
And like we saw nothing other than
Yeah.
what we were passing in the car.
Yes.
Right,
Well,
exactly.
Yes.
except the only exception to that was in England at that time. There was this 48-hour rule. You had to sign up for the casino, and the first time you couldn't go in for 48 hours. So we did have a night off while we were
nice.
waiting for the 48 hours. So
Yeah.
I got to see a show, but
Yeah.
that was it.
Yeah, I actually did. I
I'm
appreciate.
curious, real quick, what did your friends think of that? So when we went to Europe last summer, I almost couldn't talk to my friends about it because they so didn't understand. I have some friends, they're like 3 months in Europe, like that'll never happen for me. And we were in the car all day, every day scouting casinos and like eating McDonald's once a day because it's €20 for some reason was so expensive, even for the McDonald's. And it was just,
That's actually kind of an interesting point. Is like,
Yeah.
like the flip side of the parents, like the disapproval thing. The other part is the friends who they think that you're just
it can alienate
gallivanting
some
around
friends.
the world, and
Yeah.
you have this lavish life, and you don't work hard. Like it's
Pretty much my friends
They all
were
get it.
all blackjack players too at that
Okay.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
It's nice to have. I'm as much to blame. I know this is it's not a non sequitur, but we're circling back. I'm as much to blame with my parents of not having the conversations as they are, because it's hard to want to keep talking about something that people aren't understanding.
yeah.
You know?
And they get bored with it anyway.
Totally. Yeah. Or it sounds like you're humble bragging, oh yeah, I went to Europe, but it was so hard. Or, oh yeah,
right.
oh, I just was working. And they're
Yeah.
like, oh, poor you, like,
Well, Richard comes back with some great stories, though. So part of it is
yay.
in the telling. There's a Scotland Yard story. There's money falling out of Daryl's pants story. There's all these stories that he's told on this show a number of times. And so whenever he gets ready to tell them, he got it going. I've heard it 6 times, but I'm ready to hear it 7.
those good stories, man, you can't hear them enough, I think.
Yeah.
I used to say we're only in this business for the stories because,
Right.
a lot of crazy stuff happened.
So now I have a promise to a group of people that I need to keep. This weekend was a Blackjack Boot Camp sponsored by Blackjack Apprenticeship, Colin Jones. Both Joe and Semi-Pro were helping out in the boot camp. I assumed it was a paid gig, but I don't know, and I don't really care. They at one point, Colin was showing. He said, this doesn't happen much, but on a single deck, some casinos will show you the bottom card and let you cut the card wherever you want. Sometimes it has to be at least 10 cards or whatever. So somebody raised his hand and said, well, if you're on a table and these are the conditions, where do you cut the card and how many hands do you play in order to maximize your EV? So Colin says, well, gee, I don't do this very much. So I go, I'm going to ask Richard. I am sure he has done this. So Richard, single deck, show the bottom card. It's a 10 or an ace. Well, it doesn't have to be, but 10 or an ace. You get to cut the card. What do you do?
So, card counters first starting out, their first thought is, oh, it's a small card. I will cut it out of play. So the count starts at +1. and if it's a 10 or an ace, I'll cut it into play. So, it's going to come out in the round. So start it, the much better thing to do is, of course, if it's an ace, cut it to yourself as a bet card. And if it's a small card, it's actually worth more than the ace, because you have an edge if you can deliver that card to the dealer, whether it's the dealer's up card or down card. You have an edge on every hand on the table. So, and then kind of the next level is the other mistake that a lot of players make is they think, oh, well, if I cut a 10 to myself, that's like 16%, right? Edge.
14, but who's counting?
14, 15, whatever it is. Depends on whether it's single deck or multiple deck. But anyway, so they think I should deliver that to myself as the bet card. But it's actually much, much more valuable to deliver it if you know the dealer is going to be hitting with a 10, you have like a 35% edge on every hand on the table. So, and if the dealer has a hand where he does not need to take the 10 as a hit card, well, now it's coming out on the next round and you get it as a bet card anyway. So, to answer your question, if it's an ace, you want to deliver it to yourself as a bet card. If it's a small card, you want to deliver it ideally to the dealer's hole card. And if it's a 10, you want to deliver it so that, there's some finagling going on because you have 5 or 6 spots on the table, and you know that some people are probably going to have to take some hit cards, but you want to try to engineer it so that if the dealer needs a hit, he's going to hit himself with that 10.
So if you work out that you're trying to cut exactly 15 cards, if that's the number you work out is right, now when you'd had to do this at the blackjack ball and the night you won it the last time, you nailed it and got exactly 15. So how often can you get 15 or 16 or 14? And because an ace, if you get it one wrong and the dealer gets it, you're really screwed.
Right. Well, first of all, whenever we played this, there would be 3 of us, and the money was in the middle of the table. So the big player can spread to 3 hands. So now you have 3 chances of catching that ace, and if you're wrong, it's going to go either long or short and go to your teammates. So the dealer should basically never get the ace. Equally important to your cutting ability is how good your eyesight is. Because let's say I'm trying to cut 15, and I look, and if I have the ability to say, that was 13, not 15, well, now we still get the card, right, by just removing one hand. Or, and even if you end up with a civilian on the table, and the civilian cuts the cards, and you can say, oh, that was 22, well, now you can try to still engineer the hand, even though the civilian cut the cards. So your eyesight and your ability to estimate cards is almost as important as your ability to cut.
I will speak for Joe and myself. We are impressed. Well done, Richard.
Yeah, how many hours would you say it would take to be?
How accurate? I mean, I used to say if we can cut 30% accurate, 30% one card long, 30% one card short, and 10% of the time you're just off, like enough where, like, oh, the dealer moved at the wrong time or whatever, and it just went, somewhere where I can't even estimate how many it was. But if you can hit it 30%, one long or one short, it's not going to the dealer. If it's a small card, it's either going to end up at third base on a small bet, or it's coming out as the hit card, which is valuable information too, right? So if you can hit 30% and have 31 long and 31 short, that's a tremendous game. I mean, tremendous, way, way better than any card counting game ever would be. So now these games are mostly dead. I mean, they've been burned out most places. So
how much would you guys be spreading in that scenario?
Spreading? No.
Yeah.
And that's a huge no-no. Is like the last thing you want is to get backed off for counting cards
right.
when you have this game. And really the best game that I ever played of this was in Mississippi, where it was a 6-5 game, single deck, but there were 6 spots at the table, so they decided that with 6 people, you can only deal 1 round and shuffle. So we just got to cut every single hand.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
That's amazing.
That's
Wow.
That's actually why there's a chapter in Exhibit CAA called "How Stupid Is the Beau Rivage?"
Oh my gosh.
Because James actually calculated. They claimed the reason they were dealing 1 round is because they were afraid of running out of cards, and so he calculated how unlikely it would be to run out of cards with 6 players at a table in a single deck game, and.
That's like a unicorn, that game. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, well.
So even though the cards are rare, we're all impressed. And but on the same general subject, Joe, this is a case where casinos are taking countermeasures, and they are doing exactly the wrong thing for their benefit. Now, you've actually thought about this for a bit. Are there other things that casinos do to protect themselves against the evil counters, and they actually help us?
Yeah.
I know you had one time where they cut you better pen.
I think the weirdest, that was, I think
They were like, take that. He was like, thank you.
I think it was more the scenario where like the pit would say, hey, you need to cut more, and then
this was
the inexperienced
hilarious.
dealer would, of course, cut way less.
They're like,
yeah.
cut one deck, and they mean from the front, and the dealer's like,
Yeah.
okay,
Right,
and like
right.
cutting off nothing,
Yeah,
and they're
yeah.
like, no more, okay.
Yeah, and it kept going back and back and back.
It's like, can't you just back us off at
Yeah,
that point?
yeah.
Like, because then we're like, okay, we're here to play. Like, let's go. This is hilarious, and they're all flustered.
One of the weirdest ones was I was playing this double deck game, and the manager came up. He was all pissed off, and then it was a $25 min game, 25 to 1,000, and he placed he changed it from 25 to 1,000 to $5 to 1,000. I was already spreading like 25 to 2 by 1,000, so it was odd. Like I just he slammed it on the table and it kind of looked at me like, take that, And
Maybe he thought nickel players would show
Yes.
up and change your
right,
luck.
yeah,
That's what he-
Well,
that's totally what he thought.
I looked at the pit boss, not the manager, and I was like kind of like baffled, and the guy was like, "Yeah, I would not do that." I don't know
Well,
why.
another
Yeah.
one that they try
Right.
is deal really fast.
Yeah. So, I told that story last time, but there was another one of. So I was playing in somewhere in Mississippi, and I think the count was the middle of the shoe. Count was like a true 5 or something, and the manager comes over and he literally knocks the shoe off of the table, breaks the shoe, and the cards fly everywhere. And he was acting like he was being clumsy, but when I was cashing out, he went to go trespass me, and he leans into me, and goes, "Do you see how I knocked the shoe over when it was a true 5?" And I was like, wow.
Was it a true five?
Yeah, it was, but it's just the fact that he would like destroy the shoe to end the game instead of just saying to me,
like,
"Hey,
how dramatic."
Yeah.
stop playing."
Actually, along these same lines, when I was a dealer, I broke in at the Golden Nugget downtown, and I was on a double deck one day, and there was this middle-aged woman playing, very nicely dressed. And I used to talk to my players all the time, and I'm talking to her, and she's like married to a dentist, and we're talking, and all of a sudden I realize she's counting cards. Like, this never happened. I mean, with a middle-aged woman, I mean, just,
You were just as surprised as the casinos. You were like,
Well,
you
oh,
stand out. Look at you.
Yeah. So I start talking to her, how did you learn to count cards? And we start talking about counting cards. And
She had to be suspicious talking to you.
actually, no, she was really open about it. She was like, "Oh, I got playing blackjack as a business." And so we're just
Oh, that's
talking.
cool.
And most people would freak out when I was dealing and
Yes.
start talking to them about counting cards. But she wasn't. And the boss comes up to me and he gets in my ear and he goes, "I want you to deal to the last card
Oh.
and then shuffle."
Oh my goodness.
And I'm like, okay. And so I say to the woman after he walks away, I'm like, "You're going to love this." And so now we're playing, and I would get down to the last card. I would shuffle in the middle of the hand and complete the hand and just go on like this, right? And So I get off the game and I go to the boss. I was like, what the hell was that about? Deal to the last card. And he starts laughing and he points at this other boss and he goes, that guy thinks that woman is counting cards. And I'm like, oh. And he goes, yeah. Can you believe it?
Wow.
That was his way of...
A solution to solve the problem.
So, yeah. Well, I mean, he just could not believe that this woman could possibly be counting cards, so...
It's just so funny that not only did he not believe it, but he didn't... It's like the double whammy of like, oh, ha, 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 so funny, but also like, not ha, 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 that your countermeasure is like
he didn't think he was countermeasuring her. He was saying to the other boss...
Don't worry.
You're such an idiot. I'm going to show you that I can deal all the cards to this woman because
my goodness.
Obviously she can't, have a brain because she's female.
And then you quit dealing there and you started playing at the table to take advantage of this situation.
I mean, my plan from the beginning was I had already learned basic strategy and when I got here, I was learning to count and I thought, what better way to practice? I can count 8 hours a day while I'm dealing. Yeah. And I didn't have a bankroll, so it was a way to build the bankroll. And
I feel like that story reminds me of that time. I think Colin tells this story where he asked, do you have surrender? And they let him surrender or the dealer said, no, we don't offer surrender. And the pit boss said, sure, it's fine.
It's a sucker bet.
And then under his breath, it's a sucker bet. And like, let him have
on the double deck.
Let him have surrender on double deck or some double or single, something like that.
Might as well already surrender while you're after it.
Hours and hours and hours.
It's even more of a sucker
And then
bet.
they came over later and the pit boss was like, yeah, you can't do that anymore, but there are those stories where
I think for a new player getting into it, they think that every casino they go to, that they like are super sharp and they know everything.
Oh yeah.
I think they just have that general fear, new players starting out, but it's not the
case.
The
other thing is casinos tend to they just want to change something if you're winning,
right?
So, like many places that I've played, if you start winning, they will change the way they shuffle the cards.
Wow.
And sometimes back in the shuffle tracking days, sometimes the new shuffle would be much better.
To your advantage, yeah.
So,
especially if they're not used to it, they're going to be more clumsy, more slugs, yeah.
Or like if somebody's winning on the roulette wheel, they'll tell you to change which ball you're using.
Bring in the house dealer.
Wow. Yeah.
Wow.
So.
Do you like big balls or little balls? The semi-pro on last week's show. You told us that you were taking a brief hiatus from counting cards and you're now working in a health food store or something like that. Now, do you have any intentions to go back and play blackjack when you grow up, or is your future in the health food stores?
So this has actually been a conversation that has come up probably over the past year. I had quit last year.
Now, why did you quit? Just lifestyle? Well,
So this is a complicated question. So we can tie this into kind of what we were talking about this weekend for maybe choosing who you would try to bankroll, right? So I'm a winning player. I've won hundreds of thousands of dollars. I play perfectly. I'm aggressive. I'm not fearless, but like I can play the game. I'm not the optimal bankrollee for Joe. Optimally, he would have someone who's even more aggressive than him, can play breakneck hours, who, you have to be, it's not enough to have someone have a winning game sometimes. You also have to align on other things. And both of us were, I think, concerned, and I think we said this last week, that
being a middle-aged Chinese man would help. With a Chinese passport.
Okay, so this is another thing. Someone approached me barely. I mean, it's generous to say that they were kind of feeling out if they would want to work with me. I don't think it was even at that level, but I was very quick to say, I'm a young white woman and I stand out very quickly. I don't blend. I'm in every database and I never got comps. I was, flyered quickly. I've been backed off as any woman's name that they've heard, any female AP that, I might not be the best candidate. That doesn't mean I'm not a winning player, but if I ever were to get back involved, I mean, I love the game. I love beating the game. But a lot of it is like just the added pressure of being
in a relationship and
Yes.
trying to mix that work. Like
anyone who does this work, I think you have some inherent authority issues, and we worked very well together, all things considered. But I did not like having a partnership. I don't like having
a boss. Yeah.
Well, if I'm going to work as an independent contractor doing this kind of hustle, it's still really challenging to work this setup and have a boss, and then to have your boss be your boyfriend. Sure. And then, so I think that just kind of for most people has a lifespan, especially because like we're both emotional. We both get fired up. Like I'm not the most easygoing person. So I think we did really, and I joke, so this has come up at a couple boot camps. It's really hard for people just starting out to understand too why you would stop. They don't get it. And I will use the story, I hope Tommy doesn't mind, like I'm like a pull string doll, and I'll tell the story of how his sister played professionally, took a break, I think for 20 years to raise her son, and she's playing again. This is not a skill that if you stop that you couldn't start again. That's kind of all of the beauty of it. But as far as where I'm working currently, this is why I chose the name semi-pro. My goals were very different than most people who get involved with this. It was a system by which we would be able to travel together and work together and spend time together when we were first starting to date. But it's not I do like playing the game, but I don't have this like need to be in casinos, like dehydrated and malnourished and sleep deprived, bleeding for EV. It's not, I want to make art. I am very, very fascinated with the nutrition field and optimizing nutrition for like living well. I think it would be cool to overlap that with this industry to like make super powered advantage players who can like play longer and better because they're actually taking care of their bodies and not getting destroyed while they're trying to destroy the casino. It's like, I feel like so many people end up getting beat up, even though they have been successful financially. They come out of it like needing these extended breaks. I think that's a really interesting space. One of the things you can't
control though is the smoke. As long
you can't.
I know. The worst part about playing is dealing with that.
No, it's so bad. So, I mean, it's not a never for me. It wasn't even ever that we decided this is the stopping point. It just kind of tapered off.
It just became like the stress was not worth the money, or it wasn't worth the...
Well, I can't. I kind of wish I could. But yeah, there's never enough money for me to do something that doesn't feel like it's working at the time. And it worked so well in the beginning. And then again, so last year I was like, okay. I went to see... Joe and myself actually did some like medical stuff at the beginning of last year, and all of his lab work came back really bad, and mine came back really bad. And I had known for a while that a couple years of lifestyle had taken a toll on me and you for different reasons. And my doctor pretty much flat out was like, well, you have to quit your job. And I knew I wanted to take a break anyway. And so then I found another job, and then Joe found this amazing game. And so I was like, I guess I'm not taking a break. And so then that was another year. And I feel like that's true of a lot of pros that I know too, where they're on a break and then, the next good game comes up and they're not.
Never happened to me.
Yeah, never, not once. I miss the freedom of schedule. That's my biggest thing, where what I'm doing right now is not what I would want to do forever. But I've only been working there for 3 weeks. So like, we'll see how long it lasts. But it's so, the things that people get worked up about there, I don't, because I don't think there's anything harder than this lifestyle. So it's nice to just even have this season of like, wow, everything feels so easy. It's just a nice break.
I guess the whole point is, if you're thinking about getting involved with your significant other to pursue advantage play, just don't.
Well,
no, I'm just kidding. No.
So do you want to, because we can get into that if you want. Was that the last question?
Running out of time.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
We actually want to thank you both.
Thank you so
unless
much.
you want to come back for the third week now.
Don't get involved with your significant other if you're not ready to have a hard conversation.
Just real quick, it's just all I think you guys have to just be really clear about you and your goals and what you want, and just try to navigate that and see if you guys can come to a
any relationship, romantic or otherwise. Clear
Very
communication.
Good.
Thank you,
Thank
guys.
you, Joe. Thank you, Semi-Pro. Thank you, Richard. Go out and hit lots of royal flushes, everybody. Good day.